Brian, to take us home here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we're kind of broadening the scope, still sticking with the same theme of sleepers, but we're widening our scope to just all of college football. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk about kind of two different conversations. One of them is just sleepers within a conference, and we're going to break it down by conference: ACC, Big 12, Big 10, and the SEC. And then we're going to wrap everything up talking about sleepers, teams that aren't getting enough chatter that have the potential to compete for a title, which I think is going to be really interesting. But there's a lot of talk going around Notre Dame, and is this Oregon's year? Is this Texas's year? Does Georgia reclaim it? But there's some sleeper teams out there.
You know what's nice though, Trev? If we tried to argue to Notre Dame fans that Notre Dame is a sleeper this year, or to national people, they would say you're a bunch of moron homers, and they'd be right. Because you can't argue that Notre Dame's being slept on this year.
Yeah, very true.
I mean, where are they on FanDuel odds? It's like third, somewhere between first and third all off season, right?
Yeah, on FanDuel right now, they're tied for second with Texas to win the national title. Right now, they still have Ohio State first, which
they're not being slept on at all. They're not a sleeper. So this is going to look at some other teams that are sleepers. And like you said, Trev, we're going to talk about different conferences and teams that we think have a chance to compete for a league title or maybe even a playoff spot. And we'll start with the ACC. And I got to tell you, man, like I get the ACC is not good. I understand that. But they're acting like because can we be real about a couple things? The ACC as a whole is not a good conference. It's the fourth of the four Power Four conferences, and I don't know that it's overly close. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah.
I think as a conference, they're not as good as the Big 12 because they don't have the depth of the Big 12. The bottom teams in the ACC are terrible. And, you look at the team that won the ACC last year. They got beat by what? Tulane and UConn in the non-conference. You know what I mean? Like, that ain't good. But that doesn't mean that every team in that league sucks. I mean, the ACC sucked in 2013, and Clemson and Florida State was still the best team in college football. You know what I mean? I saw a tweet yesterday from College Football Nerd. That was about the kick six, and they're like, somebody tweeted out like, Bama was a kick six away from having won a title of 4 out of 5 years. And College Football Nerds, who I think are SEC homers, were like, no, because they would have got destroyed by Alabama or by Florida State in the national title game. Because if I remember correctly, the point he was making, which I thought was valid, is they wouldn't have overlooked Bama the way that they overlooked Auburn. Remember, they let Auburn jump out to like something. It wasn't like a 17-0 lead or something like that.
I knew it was double digits. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they were down big and then came back, and won the game by 3. But like they let Auburn in, and I've said, man, it was 21-3 at one point in time, Trev. They were down 21-3 and then scored late in the second half. And then, in the second quarter, make it 20. They were down 21-10 at halftime of the title game. And then they turned it on in the second half, and they couldn't guard Kelvin Benjamin, and Jameis Winston did his thing, and the defense took over and all that. But like, there was a point in time where Nick Marshall misses a seam route where if he doesn't miss that seam route, I don't know that Florida State could have come back from that. They wouldn't have overlooked Bama the same way, but that was a dominant team. The ACC sucked in 2016 and 2018. It didn't make Clemson any less dominant. You know what I mean? And I think that sometimes, like when SEC teams win a championship, that's how good the league is. Like, they've won X number of championships. And, when the ACC had won, was it 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18? They'd won 3 titles in 6 years. It was always like, well, they're only good because the league sucks. I know they're beating us when they get to the postseason, but they only beat us, because they don't play anybody. It's like this hypocritical thing. But the reality is in a lot of times they're wrong about degrading the top teams to the top because of how bad the league sucks. But we also need to be willing to admit that overall the league does kind of suck. I hope it gets better, but it does. And so what that has done is that, to me, has caused people to sleep on some teams, because even though the ACC was bad again last year, I actually think it was better than it was the year before. And I think they've got a chance to be even better this year. And there's a couple teams at the top that I think are getting slept on. Trevor, I know you've got a couple teams as well. And I think this team is my number one sleeper team in the ACC is SMU. And I think there's a couple reasons why. Trev, you and I were talking about this before the show. I think one is the league stinks. They're a team from Texas in the Atlantic Coast Conference, and I just don't think they're going to get the respect that they deserve. There's a second reason that I believe they're being slept on, and that is because of Notre Dame. Everybody has SMU in their top 20 to 25. So if you're just looking at preseason rankings, you're like, Brian, how are you saying SMU slept on? They're a consensus preseason top 25 team. Yeah, but what does everybody say that talks about Notre Dame's schedule? Everybody does it. At Sporting News, Sports Illustrated, ESPN, everybody. They'll rank Miami, SMU, and BYU in the top 20 and then say Notre Dame doesn't play anybody other than Miami. And I think that they can't admit how good they can have them in the ranking, but then they'll dismiss them and act like they're not a preseason top 20 team. And it's the weirdest thing ever, because it's like, you guys keep saying how Notre Dame doesn't play anybody other than Miami. This moron Miami fan said something the other day on Twitter. He's like, Notre Dame doesn't play anybody. And I'm like, do you know the cell phone you just had on yourself? And I'm like, wait, you're a Miami fan. You clearly don't understand the cell phone. All due respect's daily comments. With all respect, you're unique compared to most Miami fans that I engage with. Miami fan literally said, they don't play anybody. And then he said, well, I meant other than us. Well, they did play a team that beat you last year and was in the playoffs the year before, but you act like that's not a real thing. You know, people act like that. So I think part of it is, if we respect SMU, then we have to, then maybe we can't hammer Notre Dame as much for their lack of a tough schedule, because we can't acknowledge that their top three is one of the tougher top threes that they have to face. You know, and that's why I think SMU is not getting nearly enough talk about a potential ACC championship or another playoff berth this season. I'm not saying they're going to make it, but everybody acts like Miami's just going to roll away with this thing. And I'm like, well, they did lose to SMU last year, and this is a team that was in the playoffs the year before. SMU's played in more ACC title games the last 2 years than Miami has. And that's why I think they're getting slept on.
No, I think that's a heck of a pick. I like it. My first one from the ACC, because we each have two in each conference, I'm actually going with Virginia Tech. And I understand that there's a lot of narratives flying around about James Franklin and he's not able to win the big one. Well, I mean, look, let's call a spade here, folks. He's going to a program that just wasn't winning the ones, not the big ones. He was going to a place in Virginia Tech that went, 3-9 last year, 4-8, somewhere in that range. He brought a lot of good, he brought a lot of good Penn State players with him. So I think that there's a good foundation and players that are going to help distribute what the culture is going to be at Virginia Tech under James Franklin. And I think the recruiting trail is not going to take long for him to get firing on all cylinders. Now, we're talking about this year. I think Virginia Tech could be a sneaky good team this year in the ACC. Now, that being said, I don't think that they're going to fight for a playoff spot this year. I don't think that they're going to contend for the ACC title this year. Granted, if you would have told me last year at this time that the ACC championship was going to be Duke and Virginia, I also wouldn't have believed you. So anything is possible in the crazy world, which is college football. But I do think Virginia Tech is going to regain that reputation of a team that you do not want to go play, especially on the road. I think that's going to be very true of Virginia Tech this upcoming season. It would not surprise me if they were 7-5 or 8-4. I don't know if that gets them to the ACC championship game. Now, mind you, it did for Duke. But I don't know if that gets them to the ACC title game. But I do think that they are being slept on because of what they did last year. And then the big picture reputation that James Franklin brings along with him coming from Penn State of being the guy that can't win the big game. And everybody's very quick to throw out what his record is against ranked opponents. But Virginia is a much more manageable beast to tackle, in my opinion, than what Penn State has been over the last decade or so. So they're my first sleeper team in the ACC.
I love it, Trev. And I know one of my sleeper teams is a team that you had as your third as well, one of your three as well. So we'll just talk about it here. But I think Clemson's getting slept on a whole lot. This one, I have no criticism for why people are sleeping on Clemson. None. I completely get it. completely understand why people are down on Clemson. That team last year that has 4 players being projected to be picked in the first round by some people, and I don't think they're going to get all 4 picked in the first round, and I don't think they should all 4 get picked in the first round. And their bad film is why part of the reason why Clemson wasn't as good last year. But I think this Clemson team is being slept on. I think last year was an anomaly season. It was a weird season. I think that Clemson made a similar mistake, in my opinion, Trevor, to what Notre Dame made in 2022 in Marcus Freeman's first year, where they put so much on the Ohio State game that when they lost that game the way they lost that game, meaning they led for most of the game and then lost it late in the third quarter and just couldn't recover, that I think it took Notre Dame about a month to recover from that, emotionally recover from that. And when I look at Clemson last year, when they lost that game to LSU, it took them a while to recover from that. They were down, like 16-0 to Troy the next week?
Yeah.
Then they get beat. They blow a game on the road by Georgia Tech. And then I think a lot of guys on that team checked out. I think Peter Woods checked out. His film last year was very different from it was the year before. Very different. Then they go get blown out by Syracuse. Now they finished the year 6-3, 6-2 really, because they had guys out of the bowl game and all that. But they had a 1-point loss at home to Duke and got smacked by SMU. They rebounded late in the year. Had a nice road win over Louisville in one of the ugliest. I don't want to win. No, I don't want to win. No, I don't want to win. No, I don't want to win games I've ever seen. Nobody wanted to win that game. It's just Louisville wanted to lose more than Clemson did. It was a terrible game. But you know what? They found a way to get it done. They blow out Furman, and then they whoop South Carolina in the last game of the year. Well, that win doesn't look as good when you realize South Carolina was a 3-9 football team last year. But South Carolina played a lot of close games last year, Trev. It wasn't close against Clemson. I just feel like this is Dabo in his element. Look, I had Clemson as a Final Four team last year. I think you did as well. I think Vince did as well. They were a preseason top 10 team. That LSU Clemson game was a preview of a couple potential playoff teams that both folded. I just think there was so much pressure on that team, and they put so much on that LSU game, and the way that they lost, I just don't think that team ever recovered from that. Now, this Clemson team's being slept on, and I feel like they're now right where Dabo wants his team to be. They're on the Roy bus again, Trev, and this is where Dabo likes it. I think Chris Vezina is going to do very well for them. I think that their running back room is better. Not only is Gideon Davidson going into year 2, but they went out and got Chris Johnson out of the portal. I think their receiving core is going to fit what I think you're going to see a lot more downfield passing from this offense this year with Chad Morris as the offensive coordinator and with Chris Vezina, who's got a pretty good arm. He's a guy that Notre Dame liked coming out and recruited and actually offered coming out, Trev. But I feel like that this team is you got rid of some personalities that I think were more in it for themselves than they were in it for the team. And I think this year you're going to see a team that is a little bit more together. And, perfect example, Trev, is I think it was the Duke game. And I'm watching Dabo's just following Khalil Barnes, trying to go off on him. And Khalil's just like ignoring him and like almost laughing. And I'm like, dude, this is a 2-time national championship coach. This is a guy that's won multiple National Coach of the Year awards. This guy's been in the playoffs a lot, including a year ago. And you're just ignoring him. This culture's broken. Now, the question is, can Dabo fix it? That's the big unknown. But I think this Clemson team is being slept on big time. I don't know if they're a championship caliber team. I don't think their roster's championship caliber. But I will not be shocked if we go into November with Clemson fighting for the ACC, battling for the ACC championship. I really think that they're very underrated. They're very much being slept on this year. I do.
For my second team out of the ACC, I don't know if slept on is the proper term. Maybe hibernated on or REM slept on.
On.
Literally. I mean, it's slept on is a little bit too polite, but I'm talking about the Stanford Cardinals. We're talking about a program that hasn't had over 4 wins. You heard that correctly. Over 4 wins since 2018 when they went 9-4. Now, some of that was because of COVID, because in 2020 they went 4-2. So you project that over a 12-game season, maybe they land somewhere in the 6-6 to 8-4 range. That's fair. But on paper, they haven't had over 4 wins since 2018. That is a long time. That is a very long time.
Yep.
Now, some of that is by their own doing. The university wasn't putting too much emphasis in the football program. They've made some bad hires. They've made some bad personnel decisions. But I think they're slowly starting to turn around with Andrew Luck as their GM. They brought in an alum to kind of oversee football operations. They brought in Tavita Pritchard, somebody who was on staff from 2010 to 2022 with Stanford, and I believe played for Stanford. And so I really like what they're bringing back. They have one of the most veteran rosters in the ACC coming back. Now, we can have a conversation around like the level of talent. Like I like Matt Rose. We were talking about him last year. I mean, he's a linebacker, wears number 35. He has a neck roll.
Yes.
I think he has like he's a crop top away from looking like he plays in the 80s. But you kind of need culture guys like that to turn around a program that has been perennially the laughing stock or one of the laughing stocks in your conference. Now, when I mean being slept on, I do not mean that they're gearing up for a 10-2 season. But if Stanford has a 7-win season, that is their best season by far in a very long time. And so I think that they're going to be one of those teams that it's like, okay, like this is not one that Notre Dame wants to overlook or sleep on. I think they're going to be more disciplined this year. I am about as confident in saying this as I am about basically anything, that their quarterback play, especially in the early part of the season, is going to be better than what Ben Goldbranson brought to the table for them early last season. I think their quarterback play is going to be better. I think that their defense is going to be more consistent.
Can I interrupt you, Trevor? I still don't understand what the freaking heck they were doing sticking with him that long. I have no idea what they were thinking.
I got nothing.
He was, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to the kid, Trev, but he was pretty bad. Like, if they had just a mediocre quarterback, they beat Hawaii. Like, and I don't even think that's debatable. I mean, he couldn't hit. There was one play, I think it was Sam Roush, but he throws a crossing route. And I believe it was the Hawaii game. And I'm watching it, and there's not a defender on the screen, but the ball was so off target that the receiver had to dive to catch the ball for a 3-yard gain. You know what I mean? And it's like, dude, if you just hit a guy in the chest on a throw that I could make right now as a 47-year-old, that guy's catching and running. Like that limited that team on offense so much last year. Their offensive line wasn't very good either. But man, that was I'm sorry. So I just had to interrupt you because I have blocked that out of my mind. I've blocked the time of watching him to the point where they went out and got Davis Warren from Michigan, who I think is pretty terrible. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's an upgrade.
Yeah.
Like that's how bad that is. You upgraded at quarterback with Davis Warren. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I think their quarterback play is going to be better. And let's not forget, despite them going 4-8 last year, they were 4-2 at home.
Yeah.
They were. The only teams they lost to at home was Notre Dame and Pitt.
Yeah.
Now, we got to figure some things out on the road, but do I think that if they played Hawaii again this year on the road, they lose by 3 points? No. No. But I think a lot of the improvements in where Stanford's going to be slept on this year is I think you're going to see a lot less double-digit blowout losses. Like a team that's going to play you a little bit harder. They might limp to a 6-6 schedule, but that is a significant improvement from where they've been at before. So Stanford is my second sleeper team from the ACC. Brian, let's switch over and talk about the Big 12, a conference that we both believe is pretty wide open. And so who's your first team out of the Big 12?
Trev, there's a lot of options here for the Big 12. There's a lot of teams you could go with. I'm going to first go with Kansas State, and I'm going to keep riding that K-State train. I think this is a team that was very disappointing last year, and I think the reason that Chris Kleiman retired is the reason his team struggled last year. He does not know how to connect to players in this era of the portal. And I understand why. This is a guy that's been a 1AA coach his entire career. Culture and team building is everything. Unfortunately, at a place like K-State, you just have to embrace the fact that every time you build a guy up, he's going to leave and go to the portal and play for somebody better. It just sucks, but that's just the reality of it. And I don't know that K-State's doing the things they need to do to try to keep some of these guys. I mean, you had two pretty darn good defensive ends last year. And guess what? They both jumped in the portal and they went over to Indiana. You had a pretty dynamic athlete in the backfield last year. He's going across town for more money, or across the state for more money to play for Kansas. That's just the reality of it. Kudos to Avery Johnson for staying. Colin Klein, I think, coming in there, I think he's going to run an offense that fits. I just felt like they kept trying to turn Avery Johnson into a passing quarterback. And you got to let him do what he does. He's a run-throw quarterback. And I think Colin Klein will be able to kind of, look what he did with Marcel Reed. That guy's not much of a drop back passer, go through progressions quarterback, and he put up pretty good numbers. So I think that's going to be part of it. And I just think that this is a team that, are they going to win the Big 12? I don't know, but I think they're going to be in the conversation. I think they're going to have an impact on who does by knocking some teams off and things like that. So I think that's a team that is getting slept on a little bit in the Big 12 this year.
No, I like that pick. I do. My first one in the Big 12, I'm staying in the state, actually, and I'm going with the Kansas Jayhawks. I'm sure the joy it brings Sean Stiers to hear that. But I'm going with the Kansas Jayhawks. I think Lance Leopold might have something brewing up there. And I love the reunion with Andy Kotelnicki. Mm-hmm. I think that is the level of football that Andy Kotelnicki can thrive in. Penn State, I think he did some decent things in 2024. They played for the college football playoff semifinals. I also think Andy Kotelnicki was a reason for a lot of their demise in 2025. Mm-hmm. I think that there were some things that he did on offense that I just didn't fully understand, and Drew Aller played the scapegoat for that. Now, that is not me claiming that Drew Aller is a top 5 quarterback in all of college football, and it's only because of Andy Kotelnicki. I also don't think Drew Aller was the guy, but I also don't think Andy Kotelnicki was the guy for that level. But he made a name for himself at Kansas and the things that he did there. Now, I know they're losing Jalen Daniels at quarterback, but I like what they have, man. And a lot of this is just putting faith in Lance Leopold, somebody who's very aware of what coaching means at this level, and then getting his offensive coordinator back where they had a lot of success together. Because two things can be true. He might not have been the guy at Penn State, but I also think that Jalen Daniels looked a little bit different not being coached by Andy Kotelnicki either. I think both of those things can be true. I'm excited to see what they have going on. They're a sleeper team for me, and that I don't know if they're going to be able to compete for the league. I think the Big 12 is the most wide open of any of the conferences in terms of who wins the title. So would I be beside myself if Kansas is playing for the Big 12 title? No, it would surprise me a little bit, but I think they're going to be a sleeper team.
I think Andy Kotelnicki can coach at a big-time school like at Penn State if he has an offensive coordinator that can rein him in. And I think that's where him and Lance Leopold were a great connection, because Lance Leopold could say, hey, man, the creativity has to end here. Like, now we're just being creative just to be creative. Now we're just doing stuff just to do stuff. I don't know that Lance Leopold lets him throw a motion to trips and throw a wheel into the boundary in late in the game against Oregon. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't think he allows that to happen. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's not so much the level. I think it's you have to work for a head coach who can rein you in and say, no, I love your creativity. That's why I hired you, but this is where we still got to do this. We still got to do this. We still got to do this. You get 5 trick plays per game. That's it. You don't get 12. You know what I mean? Like, because dude, he was in his bag for a little bit against Notre Dame early in 2024, that first half. They had one play, I loved it. They ran a tight end wheel and then brought a tight end delay right up the jet, the trail of that guy. And you're just like, dude, and it was like right after Tyler Warren went down. And they go right to Kendall Dinkins. It's like, oh, okay, that's pretty, and then Notre Dame starts to heat him up and he doesn't have answers, and I think that's where with Lance Leopold, I think they'll have some answers. So I like that one. My number 2 team in the Big 12, Trev, and I went and looked at all the top 25s, and I only saw one outlet: ESPN, Sporting News, Sports Illustrated, CBS, I looked at all of them. I found one outlet that had Arizona State in the top 25. 1. And I think that they're going to be a very good team this year. I think they're being slept on. I think Cutter Boley's a nice quarterback, but I don't think they won, in my opinion, I don't think they won in 2024 because of Sam Leavitt. I've made this case before. I think Sam Leavitt was a byproduct of having great receivers and a great running back and a very good offensive line and a really, really, really smart head coach. I think that this year Sam Leavitt actually became a problem for them a little bit. I think his attitude and his lack of being bought into the team, I think created an environment where that team underachieved. And there were times last year they had to count on Jeff Sims to be their guy. That's not a recipe for success. But they went 3-3 with Jeff Sims as their starting quarterback, Trev. That to me says a lot. One of their losses was a 3-point loss in a bowl game. They lost to Houston by 8. They beat Iowa State on the road, beat West Virginia, blew out Colorado on the road, and lost at home to a really good Arizona team. Jeff Sims goes 11 of 25 for 3 touchdowns and throws 3 picks because he's just not a very good quarterback. I mean, you and I we've talked about this. He's not very good. Is Cutter Boley a light the world on fire guy? No, but he's a good quarterback. He's had some good moments. They also brought in Mikey Keene for depth. The kid who was at Fresno a couple years ago got hurt last year, so he ended up not starting there. But you look at the transfer portal. They brought in a couple very good backs out of the transfer portal this past year. I love their portal class at receiver, Trev. Love their portal class receiver. They bring Jalen Moss back. They bring Jaron Hamilton back. They went out and got Amorian Miller from Colorado, Raiden Vines-Bright from Washington, and a guy that you and I both liked a lot, Reed Harris, who beat Leonard Moore for a touchdown. Now, Leonard fell down, but part of the reason he fell down was a move that Reed Harris made on him. Cutter Boley, if he's just a solid quarterback, is going to have really good weapons. Really good weapons. The key is going to be, can they get the offensive line figured out? That's my big concern for them. But if they can get the offensive line figured out, Trev, I think they had a very good offseason. I do. They got Marion Winston out of the portal. They got Jalen Thompson out of the portal, who was a nice player at Michigan State. They got a really good middle linebacker from Colorado State, kid named Owen Long. They had a really good secondary class out of the portal. We talked about them as a sleeper, keep your eye on secondary, because we liked the kids that they got out of the portal in secondary. I think this is a team that people are sleeping on, and I think they're a lot closer. They're going to be a lot closer this year to the 24 version of who this team was than they will be the 25 version of who this team was.
Agreed. I think the Sun Devils were a little bit victim of the flash in the pan discussion. I think they're going to be back this year. I love that pick. I really do. My second pick out of the Big 12, I'm going with Houston. And this is a sleeper pick that I have to win the league. Everybody else has kind of been like, they're going to give people a run for their money. They're going to be, dude, Houston was like a 9-win football team last year. Willie Fritz has got something cooking down at Houston. They returned Connor Wegman, who I think now that he had a little bit of clarity, knowing that he was the guy, he's not looking over his shoulder after every snap, after every mistake, after every missed opportunity, and he's had the freedom to just go play ball, and he's in an offensive system that I think favors him a little bit more. Because let's be real about something. What Colin Klein had both Connor Wegman and Marcel Reed doing in 2024 more so favored Marcel Reed. It was kind of like the Notre Dame quarterback competition in 2016, where it's like, yeah, you're running the offense, but the things you were asking Malik to do favored Deshaun Kaiser's skill set. We can be honest about that. That's a little bit what I think happened with Connor Wegman at Texas A&M in 2024. They were asking him to be Marcel Reed, and he's not. Whereas now at Houston, they're asking him to be Connor Wegman, and he was a pretty darn good quarterback. They have one of the most veteran rosters coming back in the Big 12. I like what they're putting together, and with as wide open as it is, it's teams like the Houstons that we've seen out of this conference the last 2 years be able to put it all together and make a run at the conference title. So Houston, so far in this discussion, is the first team that I have that not only do I think they're going to be a sleeper and people aren't going to want to play them, I think they have a relatively decent shot at winning the conference this year. Now, there's going to be teams like Utah, Arizona State, BYU, Texas Tech that might have something to say about it, but it would not surprise me in the slightest if Houston is playing one of those teams for the conference title. Wouldn't surprise me at all.
I'm with you.
Brian, let's talk about the Big Ten. And this is a very interesting discussion, especially once you factor in we're talking about a conference with 18 teams in it. But there's a good amount of sleepers in this conference. Now, I would argue that the Big Ten is, in terms of conference depth, you could argue the Big Ten's third behind the SEC and the Big 12. Now, the national champion has come from the Big Ten for 3 straight years, Michigan, Ohio State, and Indiana. This year, I think the depth within the conference is going to be better. The quality of teams that are middle of the road to lower middle tier in the Big Ten, those are 2 teams, or those are going to be some teams that I think are going to surge this conference forward a little bit. But let's talk about some of the sleepers in this conference, Brian. Get us kicked off. Who's your first sleeper in the Big Ten?
I got a team that I think is a sleeper to win the league, and that's Iowa. I am on the Iowa train this year, Trev, as a team that has a chance to surprise some people. I like their 2 quarterbacks that are battling for the job, especially part of my optimism involves my belief that Jeremy Hicklinski is going to win the quarterback job. That's part of my belief. You know, they've got Kamari Moulton coming back. They got a running back from South Dakota State, or South Dakota, Trev, who's a really good back. Kid named L.J. Phillips Jr., who rushed for almost 2,000 yards last year at South Dakota State, or South Dakota, excuse me, who's a good football team. That's a really good pickup. And I know they lost some offensive linemen, but they didn't lose everybody. I think Trevor Lauk's coming back, and Cade Piper's coming back. Jack Dotzer comes back, who battled for a starting job last year. That, to me, to a degree, they're in reload mode. Will they be the Joe Morrow Award winners again? No. Are they going to still be a really good O-line? Yes. I like what they did in the portal at wide receiver. They've got a kid that I think has a chance to be a bit of a breakout this year, a kid named Reese Vanderzee, who's a 6'4" kid that can win some contested catches. They brought in an FCS kid named Tony Diaz. We talked about him when we were talking about transfer classes that I really like. Their top tight end comes back this year. And then the question is, can they overcome the losses on defense? That's really the question. They lost some really good players on defense, especially from the defensive line. And, they went out and got 4 portal kids. They've got some young players, including like Osei Epinesa that's coming up that, maybe has a chance to be a factor for them this year. So we'll see there. I like their secondary, even though they lost a couple really good players in the secondary. They got a lot of kids coming back who played. They got some portal kids that I like. And here's the big thing for me too, Travis. I think their schedule sets up very well. They get Iowa State at home. They've got a 3-week stretch that's really tough in the Big Ten. At Michigan, home against Ohio State, at Washington. Even if they just go 1-2 in that stretch, there's a chance they're a 2-loss team with an outside chance of, if somebody loses, getting into the Big Ten title game. Because the rest of the way, they play at Minnesota, talk about them in a minute, home against Wisconsin, at Northwestern, home against Purdue, at Illinois, home against Nebraska. Now, there's several games in there they could lose, but those are all winnable games. If they somehow go 2-1 in that stretch at Michigan, home against Ohio State, at Washington, which is going to be tough, then I think they become a favorite to play for the Big Ten title at that point in time. Because then if they can get through that stretch, anything other than 0-3, they've got a really good shot to be a 10-2 football team. And now again, it won't be easy, but that's why Iowa's a sleeper team for me. And so I don't think they're being disrespected. I think a lot of people have them in the preseason top 25. What I'm saying is, I think there's a chance that they could even be better than that they could be a borderline top 10 team this year if a couple things go their way. Got to rebuild the defensive line, and you need Jeremy Hicklinski to be the player that I think he can be. It's funny. I keep wanting to call him Hank because, there's 2 kids that they like, and the one kid is this really short kid that I really like him, but he just looks like a Hank Brown. And then the big tall kid looks like a Jeremy Hicklinski. But it's the little kid that's got that name. But he's a gamer, man. I really like him. He's the kind of kid that if they just let him loose a little bit, can do a lot for them. What the kid they had last year could do for them. So I like this Iowa team. I do.
Well, I think
their schedule sets up nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a solid pick. I mean, I'll be honest. I'm sleeping on Iowa. Not that I think they're going to be bad. I think they're just going to be Iowa.
Right.
I think they're going to be 8-4, 9-3, and they're going to be ranked somewhere in the top 15 until they have one of those losses. They'll go down to 19th and stay there until the end of the season. But that's why we're having the sleeper discussion, because in the scenario that you laid out, I absolutely could see that happening. So that's a good pick. My first pick in the Big Ten isn't going to surprise anybody that's listened to this show, but it's Wisconsin. I think there's a lot of things that are working in Wisconsin's favor. I think they had a very strong portal cycle. They have a head coach that is – I don't root for anybody to lose their jobs, but I think Luke Fickell is about as back against the wall, seated as hot as fire, whatever cliche you want to throw in there. I think they have that at head coach this year. You compound that with a very favorable schedule, in my opinion, especially compared to what they did last year and what they had on their schedule last year. Dude, last year they had Alabama on the road, Michigan on the road, Iowa at home, Ohio State at home, Oregon on the road, Washington at home, Indiana on the road, Illinois at home, and Minnesota on the road. That is a gauntlet, absolute gauntlet. Now, I think they're going to repeat what they did out of conference last year. I think they go 2-1 because this year they basically replaced Alabama on the road with Notre Dame at a neutral site. And then their other 2 out of conference games are Western Illinois and Eastern Michigan. I think they go 2-1 in that. Where I have a lot of confidence in them is I think their in-conference schedule is much more favorable. There's no IU. There's no Ohio State. There's no Michigan. And there's no Oregon. They've basically replaced those guys with Rutgers, Maryland, Purdue. They still have Minnesota. They get UCLA on the road now. So a lot of things for them is, can you handle some of the travel that you're going to have to go out and do? But luckily for them, their travel isn't going out to Washington and going and traveling to some of these new additions to the Big Ten. They're on the road against Penn State. Yep. They're on the road against Iowa, on the road against Maryland, on the road against Purdue, all teams that they have familiarity with. They do have to travel out west to play UCLA, though. But I think the schedule sets up favorably. They're going to be a sleeper team for me. Not one that I think is going to go and compete and win the conference, but this might be the season that kind of reinvigorates the Wisconsin fan base of, hey, let's not forget, this is a tough place to go play.
Yeah.
Let's not forget.
It doesn't suck.
Exactly.
Like, does it change that narrative? Exactly. I think if he struggles again this year, Trev, I think he's gone. I do.
Yeah. I do.
Worst thing that could happen for him is they go 5-7 and Kansas is what you think Kansas can be.
Yeah.
Because now it's like a legend from the state, Lance Leopold, is winning again at Kansas, and you're not. And you know what I mean? Like,
yep. The nightmare scenario for Wisconsin is they get absolutely blown out by Notre Dame. They get blown out by Penn State on the road, and you have ugly wins against Western Illinois and Eastern Michigan. You could have a conversation of Luke Fickell might not make it out of September.
Mm-hmm.
You could, but I have them as a sleeper team for now. I'm high on them. I think that they're going to be a different style of football team this year.
Agree. I don't disagree with you about Wisconsin. I just got to see it from Luke Fickell. I'm in Trevor Trowbridge mode. I got to see it from him. But I agree with you. I think getting that quarterback was a good first step, but he had to make some necessary changes. Here's my other Big Ten team, Trev, Minnesota. I think Minnesota's getting slept on a little bit in the Big Ten. I really do. And y'all know how much I don't love saying this, because anyone that knows me knows that I'm not at all a PJ Fleck fan. And they have an analyst, I think he's an analyst on that staff that I coached with, and he's one of the worst coaches I've ever been around. And I'm just like, this. So I don't love saying this, but I also can't lie. I really like Minnesota as a potential sleeper team this year that could maybe go out and win 9 games. They've got a young quarterback that I really like, Drake Lindsay, and I think he had a really good first season there, Trev. I do. I think he had, one of those years where it's like he had some ups and downs as a redshirt freshman, which is to be expected. Sometimes he looked lost, and sometimes he looked really good. And like you look at some of the games he had, he goes 18 of 24 for 90 yards in a win over Wisconsin. And you're like, that ain't good. Week before that, he goes 20 of 30 for 264 yards and 4 touchdowns against Northwestern. He goes 15 of 26 for 94 yards against Ohio State. Outside of that, he goes for 324 against Rutgers and 232 against Purdue in wins, and throws 5 touchdowns and only 1 pick in those games. You know what I mean? So like, you saw some potential from him last year. The other thing too is Darius Taylor's coming back. I didn't know that till I started studying rosters. They're getting him back this year, and I think that's going to be big. They also get AJ Turner back, who, remember him? We liked him going into last year. He was a running back transfer that they had last year, Trev, and I think he got hurt because he played first 3 games of the season, looked okay, and then didn't play. So I think he got hurt. So he'll be back. He's a kid that they got from Marshall, who you and I both liked, really dynamic kid. So I know Darius Taylor was a little banged up, and that team still won 8 games last year, Trev. They got some good receivers coming back. They had a solid, portal session. They got a really athletic kid from Auburn who's underachieved so far at Auburn, but's got a lot of talent as a young player. Perry Thompson was a 5-star kid coming out, and then their offensive line has several kids coming back. So I really think Minnesota, they got a lot coming back from their team last year. They had a pretty underrated portal offseason, and they've got a quarterback that I think is on the verge of jumping into that. Okay, here's the elite guys, and then here's the group below the elite guys that are good quarterbacks. And I think Drake Lindsey's got a chance to be one of those guys. And so I think PJ Fleck has found his groove at Minnesota. I really do. And I like this team he's got coming back. They're a sleeper team for me. And then you look at their schedule, Trev, there's some challenges on them. They got to play at Washington. They got to play at Indiana, at Penn State, at Wisconsin. Those aren't easy. They get Mississippi State at home, Michigan at home, Iowa at home, UCLA at home, Northwestern at home. So, it's not an easy schedule, but it's a manageable schedule. They can just pull off one road upset over Washington, Purdue, Indiana, Penn State, or Wisconsin, potentially 2, and go 3-2 in those 5 games. You're talking about a team that can win 8-9 games in the regular season, Trev, and they're not getting talked about like a team that won 9 games last year or 8 games last year, excuse me. And has a chance to improve. So I think that's going to be big for them. And if they can beat Mississippi State at home in week 2, I think that creates some buzz. And then now it comes down to their success next season, can they pull off an upset at home over Minnesota or Iowa? That is going to be the key to their season next year. Can you upset one of those teams and win 8 or 9 games? I think they've got a shot to do it.
Love it. My second team in the Big Ten, I'm going with Maryland. They're a very intriguing team for me. Yes, man. He's a big reason why I think – he's like 6'5". He's 230 pounds. He was a young kid last year. But as a team, I think Mike Locksley is he's going into year 7 now as head coach at Maryland. He was like their OC and their quarterbacks coach beforehand. But Maryland was a very interesting team last year. They started out 4-0, and they started out conference play 1-0, beating Wisconsin in probably one of the uglier football games that I've seen in recent memory. And then, unfortunately, the wheels fell off from there. But they fought. Early on during their losing streak, they started to fight. Maryland was 10 points away from being 7-5 last year, bowl eligible. They were. You go back through and you look at what they did last year. They started out 4-0. They beat Florida Atlantic 39-7. They beat Northern Illinois 20-9. They beat Towson 44-17. And then they beat Wisconsin on the road by 17. Then they hosted Washington, a talented team from last year. They lost to them by 4. They hosted Nebraska, lost to them by 3. Traveled out to UCLA and kind of caught them when they were riding the high of beating Penn State. And people like, hey, UCLA is kind of scrappy right now. They lost to them by 3. Once they got into November, it was rough. They lost to Indiana by 45. They lost on the road to Rutgers by 15. They lost on the road to Illinois by 18. Lost by 25 to Michigan, and then lost by 10 to Michigan State. This is going to be an older team this year, led by a very talented quarterback. And I think their schedule sets up relatively favorably, especially early on. They get Howard, UConn, Virginia Tech, UCLA. Once October hits, it starts to get a little bit more interesting where it's kind of week to week. They get on the road against Nebraska and on the road against Ohio State in back-to-back weeks. But then they get home games back-to-back against Rutgers, bye week, and then home game against Illinois. If they can make it through that without any major blowout losses, because I'm not going to predict them to beat Ohio State, but beating Nebraska on the road, I think that's a manageable thing.
Yeah.
I really do. If they can go 1-1 in those games, I'm going to be very interested to see what Maryland does. Again, I don't think they're going to be competing for the Big Ten title for obvious reasons, but this is going to be a scrappy team this year.
If I had more faith in Mike Locksley, I would be right there with you. Because Malik Washington, to me, is good enough for 2 to 3 wins if you use him right. Mm-hmm. He's that good, in my opinion. I mean, I had him on my top 10 list when we did our top 10 quarterbacks for this year. And that's knowing all the things he's got going against him at Maryland. If Mike Locksley can get that team turned around, I could see Malik Washington becoming a legend at Maryland because he turned down big money to stay at Maryland this year.
Yeah.
And I think he's got some loyalty to Coach Locksley in that program. And if he has a big year and Maryland can keep him there, I could see him being a guy that portal kids flock to in 2027. But you got to win. You got to win to make them to want to do that. I'm not going to go there and go 4-8. You know, like you go 6-6, 7-5 or better, go to a bowl game. Malik puts up numbers. You keep him in the offseason. Now, all of a sudden, that left tackle that was otherwise going to go somewhere else decides to come to Maryland. That receiver that was going to go to North Carolina decides to come to Maryland. 100% agree. They're not going to beat like Notre Dame and Ohio State for kids, really. But that's not who they need to get. It's like you got to beat North Carolina for that kid that they wanted. You've got to beat Rutgers for that portal kid that they wanted. You've got to beat, Georgia Tech for that portal kid that they wanted. And they can start winning some of those battles. Malik's the kind of kid that can do that if they can win this year. I like that one.
Let's talk about the SEC, Brian. Who's your number one sleeper out of that conference?
I think this is one that you and I both had, Trev, and that's Auburn. I think Auburn is a team that people are absolutely not giving enough preseason respect for. And I think a big reason why is I don't think Alex Golesh is getting the same love and attention and assumptions that people are giving to John Sumrall. I'm not sure why that is. I don't know if John Sumrall is a more likable guy or goes on more shows or something. I don't know. And so people are going to hype his team up. I have no clue. And I'm not against John Sumrall. I think John Sumrall is a good coach. I just am curious why Auburn doesn't get as much hype for the hiring of Alex Golesh, who's been on better teams an assistant than John Sumrall's been on, with all due respect. And South Florida wasn't exactly a bunch of bums last year. They were a pretty good football team last season. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, Trev. That's for sure. And the other reason why is I'm a big fan of Byron Brown.
Heck yeah.
And I think he's a legit SEC caliber quarterback. And I don't care what his throwing motion looks like. I've watched him beat Florida in the swamp. He can throw however the heck he wants. He can throw passes like that if he wants. You know what I mean? Like, that kid can ball. And he can throw, he can run. He's a hard-nosed player. I think you look at their team, they've got one of the better backfields that nobody's talking about. Jeremiah Cobb almost had 1,000 yards last year in a garbage offense with no quarterbacks that can throw past the line of scrimmage. And it's not even just that I love Byron Brown. He's so much better than Jackson Arnold and Ashton Daniels.
What?
I mean, think about what the offense looked. I know, right? What a bold statement. You know what I mean? Like, no way. It's just like, think about how dynamic that, and I know it was against an FCS team, but think about how dynamic that offense looked in the one game they had Deuce Knight. Well, Byron Brown is Deuce Knight in 2 years. You know what I mean? And 30, 40 more pounds. I mean, that's what Byron Brown is. And the system is going to be competent, which it was not under Hugh Freeze. They're going to have a legit. Now you're trying to tackle Jeremiah Cobb, and oh, by the way, Byron Brown just pulled it, and he's running around the edge at 240. You went to the transfer portal. You got Bryson Washington from Baylor. You got Nakai Davenport from South Florida. You got Tay Meadows from Troy. Those kids combined for 2,000 yards last year, Trev, and 19 touchdowns to go with Jeremiah Cobb. They lost a lot of receiver. I get it. He basically brought his South Florida receiving core with him. So you got a bunch of dudes that aren't elite players, but they know how to play. Again, these are the same receivers that went out and beat Florida. Went out and brought in a tight end, Jonathan Eccles, who actually had a Notre Dame offer out of high school. They got Jake Johnson from North Carolina, former top recruit. Their offensive line, they brought in some transfers on the offensive line. Their defense has to get remade, but again, they brought in some really good transfers. So I think they had they got Xavier Atkins is coming back. I think they had a really good, very, very, very underrated portal pickups, and I don't think they're a borderline preseason top 25 team for me. So is Florida, and that's what I'm saying. My comment is not that John Sumrall doesn't deserve the hype he's getting. I'm all for it. I think he's a guy that has a chance to win there. It's why is he getting it, but they're not getting the same at Auburn. I really like this Auburn football team this year, Trev. And they were a lot better last year than their record. That's what I think a lot of people are sleeping on also. Auburn was a 5-7 football team last year because of poor coaching and god-awful quarterback play. Now I know they lose some guys from last year's team, but I think their schedule is going to be challenging. But I think they beat Baylor. They've got Southern Miss at home, Florida at home, Vanderbilt at home, LSU at home, Arkansas at home, Samford at home. If they can hold serve at home, their road schedule's tough. At Tennessee, at Georgia, at Ole Miss, at Mississippi State, at Alabama. If they can hold serve at home, they can win 9 games next year. Now, holding serve at home won't be easy. You play LSU, you play Florida. That's not going to be easy. But I think they can go on the road and beat Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss is going to be down this year. I think they go on the road and beat Mississippi State. I think they could go on the road and beat Tennessee. That's going to be real tough. And I think they have a shot to go on the road and beat Alabama because it's a rivalry game, and they've played Alabama tough recently. So I like Auburn. They're being slept on a lot, in my opinion.
Agreed. I love the Auburn pick. It was one of mine as well. So I think they're going to make some noise in the SEC this year. I think the Iron Bowl is going to be very interesting this year. That is for sure. My first sleeper team in the SEC, I believe, was another one that we had shared, Brian. It's Kentucky. They're a team that's just not getting a whole lot of attention. I understand the whole stigma. They're a basketball school. They're not going to do a whole lot of football. Well, I don't know if you go out and make some of the portal acquisitions that they made, you go out and hire a guy like Will Stein if you're not striving to be some level of a football school. I really don't. I don't believe that to be true. We can have conversations about what they did on the defensive coaching staff. That's my one hesitation of who they have running that side of the ball that could prevent them from being a better team than what I think they're going to be. But their blueprint for what they want to be as a team is very obvious. They want to be very athletic and they want to be big. You can go through and see that in just some of their portal pickups. They got Jamarian Harkless on the interior of the D-line. He's a 6'3", 345-pound kid. They got an edge rusher from Antonio Berry. I believe he's from Fresno State. He's like 6'6", 240. I love some of their other portal pickups, though. Obviously, they got Kenny Minchie from Notre Dame. A lot of us as Notre Dame fans thought highly enough of Kenny Minchie that he pushed C.J. Carr all the way up until the middle of fall camp to be the starting quarterback at Notre Dame. I'm very excited to see what he can do under Will Stein in that offense. Kenny Minchie's a good football player. Very interested to see what he can do. I like their portal pickup, going out and getting C.J. Baxter from Texas. They also got Nick Anderson, a 6'4" wide receiver from LSU. So a lot of really good pickups here for them. They got Tegratish Bola from Ohio State, I believe he started in the national championship game.
Yep, he did. He was a starter for them last year. Now, he was possibly going to lose the starting job. That's kind of part of the reason he left, but he still started for 2 years at Ohio State. That's an upgrade over what they had at right guard last year.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Kentucky's going to be a team that, again, common thing for me is a team that I don't think people are going to want to go down and play. I don't see them competing for the conference title. I don't have them making the playoffs. But one thing that Kentucky has lacked consistently over the last couple of seasons has been an offense that can compete when they face top-level competition. I really don't think that's going to be an issue for them this year. I don't. So Kentucky's a sleeper team for me in the SEC.
My second SEC sleeper team, Trev, as far as a team that I don't think they're going to be a sleeper team that's going to win the SEC, but I think they're going to make some noise. They're going to have a couple upsets that shake up the league standings, and that's Mississippi State. I really like what Jeff Lebby's building there. He's going to need a little bit more time. It's going to be a slow build there. They can't just go out there and buy players the way that they maybe could in the past, because now teams that would have poached from in the past are kind of offering what they're offering. But they're doing a nice job of building a team. But look, some of these sleeper teams, Trev, a lot of it for me really revolves around the quarterback. And when I look at Mississippi State and I watch the potential for Kamario Taylor to take a jump as a sophomore, he had some really nice moments last year. I mean, early against Ole Miss, they were in that game because of just the playmaking ability of Kamario Taylor. If they can get any kind of protection for him, he's got a chance to be a really good quarterback. And, he didn't play a lot till later in the year. Blake Shapen was obviously their starter early in the season, but you go watch him in their last couple games. I think, Ole Miss, he had some big throws early. He played relatively well against Wake Forest in their bowl loss there. He's a run throw guy, dynamic kid. He ran for 173 yards and 2 touchdowns. I'm looking at that right here. His last 5 games when he started getting more playing time, he had games of 55, 53, 22, 173, and 63 on the ground. And he's just one of those playmakers that when he gets hot, you're just going to have a hard time stopping him. That's just kind of how he is. And, the Fluff Bothwell, I believe, is back for them. I believe I've got to go check that because I think there's been some discrepancy, but their top receiver comes back this season. They're a team, Trev, that I think has a chance to make some noise and get to a bowl game this year. Big key is going to be how they start. Their first 5 games is brutal. If they can survive and let's just say go 3-2 against this schedule, they've got a shot to battle for a bowl game. They start off against Louisiana Monroe, then they're at Minnesota, at South Carolina, home against Missouri, home against Bama. Like, that's a tough start to the season. They could go 1-4 during that stretch, and their season's over. They could go 2-3, and now your schedule's a lot tougher because you still have at LSU, at Texas, at Ole Miss. You've got home game against Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, and Auburn, Tennessee Tech. But if somehow they can go 3-2 against that stretch, then you've got to beat Tennessee Tech at home, Auburn at home, and then one of Vanderbilt, Oklahoma at home, and then at Ole Miss, at Texas, at LSU. You just got to win one of those to get to a bowl game. If they can go 6-6 this year against that schedule, they've turned a corner. And when you've got a kid like Kamario Taylor, if you can keep him healthy and help him to keep progressing, he's got a shot to be the kind of kid that can just pull off a couple games like that. He's a very talented young man. Got to learn how to read defenses and all that, but he's just that college kid where, like, there's going to be games you're like, yeah, he looked like a sophomore with only 3 games of experience right there. And then other games you're like, dude, this guy's going to be a Heisman contender someday. He's just going to have some of those ups and downs, but when he's on, they can upset just about anybody. And we saw that last year too, Trev. This Mississippi State team had some ugly games last year, but they beat Arizona State. They got blown out by A&M, but then they go on the road and beat Arkansas. They almost beat Texas last year. They had Texas dead to rights and just choked that game away at the end. They battled Tennessee for 4 quarters, only lost by a touchdown, lost to Florida by only 2. This is a team that's close, and they're getting closer and closer. And I think this is a big year for Jeff Lebby. And if he can get Kamario Taylor going, I think they could be a team that surprises people.
My second team in the SEC, I'm nervous putting them on here because their success is kind of solely dictated by, I guess you could say, the behavior of their head coach. And I'm talking about South Carolina. Mm-hmm. This is a very volatile team. And I'm a big believer that programs kind of model themselves in their play after who's leading the program.
Mm-hmm.
Talent is not a question for South Carolina's team. Look, last year they finished 4-8. But you go and you look at what that 4-8 entailed. They were a 10-point loss on the road against LSU. They choked away the Alabama game by, for whatever reason, letting them score.
That's still one of the dumbest coaching decisions I've ever seen in my life. Alabama's kicking situation was almost as bad as Notre Dame's last year, Trev.
Yeah, bro.
Make him kick it. Make him beat you with a 40-yard field goal. Seriously.
Yeah.
That was so dumb.
That was
so dumb.
Terrible decision. You allowed Texas A&M on the road to have their largest comeback in school history. And then you lost, I believe, on the road at home, to Clemson 28-14 in what just wasn't really that pretty of a football game. Now, this year their schedule does not get much easier. Like, I won't lie, this schedule's kind of a gauntlet. Mm-hmm. They get Mississippi State at home, Alabama on the road, Kentucky at home, Florida on the road, Tennessee at home, Oklahoma on the road, A&M at home, Arkansas on the road, Georgia at home, and then Clemson on the road. Mm-hmm. That's not an easy schedule. So what do I mean by a sleeper team? I don't think that they're going to win the SEC. I think that they have the opportunity to pull off some upsets. They have a very veteran team. Like right now, their projected defensive starting lineup, including Dylan Stewart, who I think is one of the most gifted edge rushers returning in college football. It goes junior, redshirt, senior, redshirt, junior, senior, junior, 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 redshirt, senior, senior, and a junior. So experience is not going to be an issue for this defense. It's what direction are they pointed in. I still have questions about Lenora Sellers as a quarterback, but I think his physical tools are there. Now, I don't think he's what he's cracked up to be. Like, he could be like a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. He's the best quarterback in the SEC. I don't think he's lived up to that hype, but I think he's a talented kid. And if Shane Beamer can get him pointed in the right direction, I think South Carolina is going to be a team that could pull off some sneaky upsets this season and make some teams' path to the playoffs a little bit more challenging. That's kind of my prediction for them this year.
I'm with you. I see it. I just have no faith that he's going to do it. He's got to change his personality with that schedule.
Oh, yeah.
What I think you could see happen, Trev, I could see them going 4-8, but having a game or two where you're like, boy, that win was, wow, where'd that come from? And that shook up the SEC championship race. That part of it, I agree with you on. That roster's too good to be this bad.
Agreed.
But like when you have a coach that's as mentally immature as he is, that's what you're going to get.
That's the weird thing about South Carolina. I could see him go 5-7, including their 2 like out of conference games against nobodies. But then like 3 of their wins are against like Clemson, Georgia, and Oklahoma for whatever reason. But then they get blown out in their other games. It's a very volatile team.
Yep.
Let's wrap up this conversation with national title contenders, Brian. We'll make this one pretty quick, but we each have 2 that we think have the opportunity to contend for national titles that aren't being talked about nationally as title contenders. Who's your first one?
People are going to laugh at this, and it could go either way, but this is a team that I think could surprise some people this year if they can do a couple things well. And that first one is Alabama. Alabama, everything people are saying about Alabama's last year's team is true, and it's probably worse. There's a lot of people that ran cover for Alabama and made excuses for why they belonged in the playoffs when the reality is they had zero business being in the playoffs last year. Zero. In their last 2 games of the regular season, they barely beat a 5-7 team who had fired their coach and benched their starting quarterback and then got blown out in the SEC title game. 0. But I look at this team and I say, there's still a lot of talent coming back. Both sides of the ball. I think some attitude problems left the program. And now you're in a situation where I think they have maybe more talent than people give them credit for. I'm seeing a lot of people having Alabama like in the 15 to 20s. I saw one top 25 that had them in the 20s. And my response isn't like, oh my gosh, how could you have Alabama that low? It's like, I get it. I totally get it. And if you were to ask me, where do I think Alabama will finish? I would predict that that's closer to where they'll be because their schedule's tough. And Kalen DeBoer has not shown us that he knows how to get the most out of this football team. They've had some really bad losses the last couple of years. This year's schedule is not a gauntlet, but it's not easy either. They play at Kentucky. They play at Mississippi State, at Tennessee, at LSU, at Vandy. That's not a gauntlet. They have home games against East Carolina, Florida State, South Carolina, Georgia at home, A&M at home, Chattanooga at home, and Auburn at home. That's a manageable SEC schedule if Bama plays to their potential. It could get us to the playoffs. There's 2 keys for Alabama, 2 keys. One is, does Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb remove their craniums from their sphincters in enough time to say, we can't keep pretending we're in the Pac-12. Yes, you're a smart football coach and you can throw the ball more than they've thrown in the past, but you're still Alabama. You still have talented runners. Run the ball. I'm not saying you got to look like 2012 Bama, but you can't look like that hot mess. You can't look like a Hal Mummy offense either. And if they can kind of get their heads out of their you-know-what's, Trev, and say, we've got to be a balanced football team, that still has playoff run talent, especially at quarterback. The second key is Keelan Russell has to beat out Austin Mack. I like Austin Mack. And if Austin Mack's their quarterback, they can still be a playoff team. I just think Keelan Russell has that put the team on my shoulders, CJ Carr type of year 2 potential in him for Bama. Austin Mack's a really good player, but he doesn't have that type of ceiling. If Keelan Russell wins the job, it's because he raised his level of play. And honestly, they're going through their own CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie battle where the veteran's a really good player that you can win with. But that young guy has got something special. And can he beat out the veteran player that the staff knows better? That's the question. If Keelan Russell forces himself, not handed the job, they're betting on potential, but he plays better. And they decide with all these transfers and we've got talented running backs and all this kind of stuff, guys, we got to get back to playing Bama football. We got Daniel Hill and Kevin Riley and all that, but we got E.J. Kroll coming in, man. This is the best running back in high school football last year. This kid's a stud. It's time for us to get back to playing Bama football to some degree. I think Bama gets back to being that team that can compete for a title. There's still a lot of talent at Alabama, Trev. We did our DB breakdown last week. Bama was number 3. And part of getting their heads out of their is figuring out how to get Ryan Williams going. They got Noah Rogers out of the portal that we like. They've got talented tight ends. Their offensive line had some losses, but they got some really good players coming in. They got a kid from Mississippi State that I like a lot. You know what I mean? Like, there's talented players there. Jackson Lloyd's a talented player. There's some guys you can build around there. I think Michael Carroll's back. He's a really good football player. Defensive line-wise, they lost some good players. Some of those guys are losses. Tim Keenan's a loss. LT Overton's a loss. James Smith, to me, is not a loss for a host of reasons. You went into the portal. You got Terrence Green out of the portal. You got Devin Tompkins out of the portal. I think it's a good pickup. You got Kedrick Bingley Jones out of the portal. Linebacker, you got Yanze Pierre on the edge as a really good pass rusher. I think this team has a lot better talent than people think. The doubters are doubting Kalen DeBoer, and they are spot on. But I still think Kalen DeBoer has an opportunity if he's able to adjust his thinking a little bit and say, yes, we're going to still throw the ball and still be all this and all that, but we've got to be balanced. We've got to be able to go out there and run for 150 yards every week. That's it. If they can do that, this team is dangerous, very dangerous. And I think nobody fears Bama anymore. And that hurt them the last 2 years. That can help them this year. If they make those changes, because now you might sleep on Bama a little bit, especially early on. And so they're a team to watch. They're either going to collapse and he's gone, or they're going to bounce back, surprise some people, and be a team that, like, wow, how'd Bama get to the semifinals? And once you get to the semis, Trev, it's everybody's ball game. Anybody can win.
Yeah, well, absolutely. My first one, I know people in the Irish breakdown community, especially the Notre Dame fan base, is not going to like. But that team up in Ann Arbor intrigues me. It does, for a couple of reasons. One, I think Kyle Whittingham is a very good coach. I think they have a very talented quarterback. Now, do I think that he's the generational whatever that he was made out to be? No, I don't. He could be generational in terms of what Michigan has had at quarterback. I'm willing to admit that when you have had guys like John O'Corn and J.J. McCarthy won a national championship. He was not a generational talent. He was not a top 10 NFL draft pick. He was, but he wasn't. Yeah.
Just like Christian Ponder was a first-round draft pick, but he wasn't.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So Bryce Underwood has the opportunity to be that for Michigan, but I don't think he has the potential to be that in terms of the rest of the country. Here's where Michigan intrigues me. Everything that they went through earlier this offseason with Sharon Moore is going to do one of two things for this roster. It's going to break them apart, and Kyle Whittingham is going to have to, hey, I said what I said, Chief. I'm sorry, buddy. I'm sorry. I don't love saying it. I don't love saying it. Sorry, man. But here's where I'm at with this team. Everything that they went through this offseason is either going to galvanize them or completely fracture the locker room of the players that stayed. That can be a dangerous team when we start talking about the playoffs. Do I think they win? No, I don't. Could they make a run? Yeah. And I think any team that makes a run in the playoffs, you could consider a title contender because they had the opportunity to play for one. The other part that intrigues me about Michigan is who they hired at defensive coordinator. They brought in Jay Hill from BYU, somebody who Kyle Whittingham has a lot of experience going up against, considering he was at Utah for quite some time. What I know about this Michigan team is they're going to be disciplined. They're going to be stout in both of the trenches, and they're going to have the most physically talented quarterback that they've had under center in quite some time. Yep. That's a recipe for a team that could make a run. I'm not betting on it.
Not being led by a coach who has no clue how to use that kid.
100%. It's not a coincidence that when Sharon Moore had nothing to do with the offensive game plan, and when I mean nothing to do with it, I mean he physically wasn't on the sidelines, Bryce Underwood had his best games of his career so far in college. That's not a coincidence, folks. It's not.
Yep. Trev, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. My only pushback is I don't think this Michigan team is as talented as they've been in the last couple of years in the trenches, and that's my only concern. If I'm wrong on that, then you'll be right on your prediction, because that team wasted a lot of talent last year.
Mm-hmm.
We did our top 10 secondary group the other day, and Michigan was in it. Their offensive line, I have some question marks about. Their D-line, they've got some guys that they lost, they got to replace. Andrew Marsh is going to be he's going to be a problem in the Big Ten this year. He is. And then I think their running back room is getting slept on a little bit too. You brought in Savion Hitter, and then of course you got Jordan Marshall, who's now another year removed, from his injury. The big key is going to be they need their offensive line to be better than what I think it is, and they need somebody to emerge as a weapon opposite Andrew Marsh. Is that one of the guys that they have coming back? Is that Jamie French? I don't know the answer to that question, Trev. And I don't know that I love the options, but that's going to be the key. Is it J.J. Buchanan, the kid that they got from Utah, who's kind of like a weird, is he a receiver? Is he a tight end? Is he an H-back? Like, I don't know what he is. I just know he catches a lot of passes. You know what I mean?
He's like their modern version of like Devin Funchess.
Yeah.
I
don't know what he is. Is he a tight end? Is he a receiver? Is he up for the Mackey or is he up for the Blitnikoff? I have no idea, but he just makes plays. That's really some of my concerns, but like they're going to look like a much better football team. I don't think people really appreciate how much talent they wasted the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So my only other one is if I had to pick a second, Trev, it's probably Oklahoma. And I don't know that I can fully jump on board on this one simply because I still don't know that I trust Brent Venables in some of those real big games. That's a concern. And I think they lost a decent amount. They lost enough up in the front seven on defense that can they still be as elite on defense as they were this year? That's a question. I still think they're going to be pretty good. Big reason I think Oklahoma's going to be better than people think is I think their offense is going to be a lot better. They lost some good players at receiver, but I think Satanga comes back, right? They got some good portal pickups. Their running back room should be pretty darn good this year. They got some kids coming back there. And then, you're going to have your quarterback back for a second year. And I think that's going to help. But he's got to stay healthy. Obviously, that's going to be a big thing for John Mateer, but he's going into year 5 of this offensive system, right? Because he followed his offensive coordinator. Torrey Blaylock's a really talented player. Xavier Robinson's a talented player. I like those two kids. Satanga comes back. You got Terrell Harris from Virginia out of the portal, who's a really good player for Virginia. Parker Livingstone is a really underrated pickup out of the portal, and he fits that offense real well because they like to get guy. One thing that Ben Johnson was good at last year. Not Ben Johnson. What's their offense? It's Ben. Oh, what's his name? Trev. What's the offensive coordinator's name? Ben Arbuckle, right? Think of Ben Johnson, really smart offensive guy. He is really good at figuring out ways to get guys in space for big plays. I said I might have texted this to you during the LSU game. I might have texted it to somebody else. I said they're about to hit a big play in the pass game. And LSU is going to be toast because LSU was look like they might win that game. And I was like, nope. They did the same thing against Ole Miss to get back in that game. They did the same thing to pull off a win against, several teams like that. They had games where you're like, oh, they're about to lose. And then nope, they rip off some 75-yard touchdown pass out of nowhere to win the game. They did it against Michigan. They got a big play against Michigan. They did it against Tennessee. And you're just like, dude, they're going to hit some big play. That's just kind of what they do. And then boom, hit that big play. And I just that to me is what he's really good at that. And now this year, I think you're going to see some of those things. And this team's got a chance to be even better as long as they can keep their quarterback healthy. I think Oklahoma's a dark horse if Brett Venables can. He's not Shane's Beamer. But I also think sometimes he's a little so intense that his team can get a little bit too amped up and make some big mistakes that hurt him. I think they got a little tight, like in the Bama game, for example, and blew that 17-0 lead. But let's not forget that they blew a 17-0 lead, which would have got them in the quarterfinals. You know what I mean? I think their offensive line is going to be really good. I like this Oklahoma team. I thought they were overrated last year. I don't think they belonged in the playoffs based on the record, but they weren't a top 10 team. I think this Oklahoma team will be even better than last year's Oklahoma team. I think. And again, we just did their secondary also should be one of the 10 best in college football this year.
Yeah, the only other team that I'm going to talk about here is going to be Texas A&M. They are an intriguing team to me. Some of this is going to come down to how do they replace everything they lost in the trenches on both sides of the ball. I don't have a whole lot of questions about their skilled talent. Marcel Reed is who he is, and based on who he was last year, they were a playoff caliber team. There are times when you could say he is who he is, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Now, there's still some things he can do to develop his game, but if you can replace the talent that you lost in the trenches, this is going to be a very, very, very intriguing team this upcoming season. I think their schedule is somewhat favorable for an SEC schedule. Can Holman Wiggins get his guys all, together and have somewhat of a, I don't want to say cohesive offense. I guess more of a consistent offense because it's been a lot of back and forth over the last couple of years.
I think the second word you used is much, much more appropriate, Trev. Not cohesive, consistent.
Yeah.
They looked like a different group from one week to the next.
Yep.
A lot of times. Yeah.
And that was the biggest thing. There were times where Colin Klein tried to get too cute based on the opponent that they were playing. You have a lot of speed. The Isaiah Horton pickup intrigues me. He wasn't what I thought he was going to be at Alabama. Are his opportunities a little bit different down in College Station? Potentially. Very interested to see what they do this year, but I like Mike Elko as a head coach. I think they're going to be a disciplined football team. They return quite a bit of talent on the back end of their defense. The biggest question is going to be how they're going to be in the trenches. If they're short up on the offensive and defensive line, I think this is a team that could make a run this year. I really do. Really do. Well, folks.
I agree. Good stuff, man.
That is going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown podcast. I believe IB Nation Sports Beat is going live tonight. I'm checking.
They are going to do a women's basketball mailbag in advance of tomorrow's big game against Vanderbilt. So, yeah, Sean will be there. I think Sean is doing it from location. He's actually in. Obviously, Sean does the play-by-play. For those who don't know, Sean does the play-by-play on the radio for the women's basketball team. So he is, I believe, I don't know, where's the game at? I didn't check that. But he will be on, I think they traveled today. So Sean will be where he needs to be for that. It is, let me see here. The game is being played in Fort Worth, Texas. So he'll be going live, I believe, from there tonight. So, yep, going to be some fun tonight. Women's basketball mailbag, I believe, is what they're doing.
Cool. Well, you're going to want to make sure you tune into them. That goes live at 5:05 p.m. Brian and I are going to be back tomorrow for the Friday free-for-all mailbag. So,
and they will talk a little Notre Dame football too, just so you guys are clear.
Well, good deal. And if you still want more of your mailbag questions answered, Brian and I will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. for our Friday free-for-all mailbag. So you're going to want to not miss that. On your way out of here, folks, please be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the privy message boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com. So until tomorrow, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.